The restaurant was supposed to be empty. The lights had been dimmed, the last guests had left hours ago, and the polished marble floors gleamed in silence. Yet when Alexander Reed pushed open the side door, the echo of music floated through the air. It was not the slow background jazz that usually lingered in the dining hall, but something vibrant, alive, and untamed. It was samba. The beat of drums rolled like a heartbeat, quick and insistent, and it made him stop in his tracks. He was not used to surprises. His life was measured, precise, and controlled. Every deal was calculated, every move deliberate. But the sight before him was nothing he had ever calculated for. At the center of the vast dining space, where only hours ago wealthy patrons had toasted champagne, a young waitress was dancing as if the world belonged to her. Camila Torres did not see him. Her eyes were closed, her lips curved into a smile that was rare in this cold place. She had shed her stiff black uniform and slipped into a faded burgundy dress that caught the low light and shimmered like fire when she spun. Barefoot, she glided across the floor with movements that were both graceful and fierce. Her arms swayed her hips, followed the rhythm her hair slipped loose from the bun she wore during her shifts. It was not a performance for anyone. It was freedom. Alexander had seen her many times before. To him, she had always been background, a shadow moving between tables, silent, efficient, invisible. The kind of person his world never paused to notice. Yet here she was transforming the empty hall into a stage no one had asked for, but one that felt inevitable. Every step, every turn, every breath seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken dreams. Something inside him tightened. He could not look away. The billionaire who closed billion-dollar contracts without flinching now stood frozen, caught by the sway of a waitress dancing samba at midnight. It should have been ridiculous. It should have been unimportant. Instead, it felt like something cracking open in his chest, something he had buried long ago. Camilla moved with abandon. She twirled, laughed softly to herself, and clutched an imaginary partner in her hands as the music surged. For a moment, she looked like a girl standing on a carnival street, in Rio, not a tired waitress who scrubbed glasses for tips. Alexander could almost see it, the colors, the joy, the forgotten dream she carried with her. His footsteps creaked against the polished floor, and she froze. The music still played, but her body went still, eyes flying open, to see him there standing tall in his tailored suit, face unreadable in the half-light. Her breath caught in her throat. Fear rushed into her expression. She clutched at the hem of her dress as if she had been caught committing a crime. "Mr. Reed," she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. I did not know anyone was here. I am sorry." Silence stretched between them. The music pulsed behind like a second heartbeat. Alexander studied her the way her chest rose and fell. The panic in her eyes, the vulnerability of someone used to being scolded. He could have ordered her out. He could have reminded her she was staff, nothing more. That would have been the Alexander everyone knew, the cold billionaire who spoke in clipped tones and walked away. But something in the way she looked at him, caught between fear and longing, struck deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, his voice softened. "Do not stop," he said quietly. The words shocked her. She blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. His gaze held hers steady, unwavering, not cold this time, but searching. And just like that, the air shifted. The restaurant where Camilla worked was one of the crown jewels of the Reed Hospitality Group. a place where the city's wealthiest came to dine under chandeliers imported from Italy, sip wines that cost more than her entire paycheck, and listen to live musicians playing softly in the corner. For most guests, it was a haven of luxury, a retreat from the chaos of the city. For Camila Torres, it was survival. She had worked there for nearly a year, clocking in and out, without fail smiling, when she was told to smile, bowing her head when reprimanded, and moving through the shadows like a ghost. She was 24 years old, daughter of Brazilian immigrants, who had come to the United States chasing better opportunities. Life had not turned out as bright as her parents dreamed. Her father had left long ago. Her mother battled an illness that drained what little savings they had, and Camila had to abandon her own dream of studying dance. Samba had once been her language, the way she expressed joy and sorrow. But now it was reduced to a secret she guarded during stolen moments when no one was looking. She lived in a small rented room, with peeling paint, always one paycheck away from eviction. Each shift she tied her hair into a bun, buttoned the stiff black uniform provided by the restaurant, and reminded herself she was here for her mother, not for herself. She endured rude customers who snapped fingers at her, laughed at her accent, or ignored her as if she were invisible. She endured Vanessa. Vanessa was 35, the evening shift manager. Sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and unrelenting, she had worked her way up in the industry, and she wore her position like armor. She barked orders at the staff, found fault in everything, and seemed to take particular satisfaction in humiliating Camila. Perhaps it was Camila's quietness, perhaps the flicker of beauty that even a plain uniform could not hide, or perhaps just the cruelty of someone who believed authority gave her the right to crush others. To Vanessa, Camila was an easy target. Walk faster, she would snap when Camila carried trays. Stand straighter, do you want the guests to think you are lazy? And smile even if it kills you. This is not your mother's diner. Camila never spoke back. She learned early that silence was her only shield. But every insult carved deeper, and by the end of each shift, she felt her spirit shrinking. Then there was Alexander Reed. He was 31, the man whose name was on every wall plaque, whose money had built the very foundation beneath her feet. To the world, he was the golden young CEO, heir to a legacy of hotels, restaurants, and private clubs. To those who worked under him, he was a shadow that passed through on rare visits, dressed in perfect suits, speaking only when necessary, his eyes colder than marble. He was the kind of man people whispered about but never approached. Camila had seen him from afar many times walking through the dining room with investors or celebrities. She would lower her gaze and step aside. He never noticed her, or at least she believed he did not. To him, she was no different from the linen napkins or the polished silverware part of the scenery that kept his empire gleaming. What Camila did not know was that Alexander's silence was not born only of arrogance, but of loss. His parents had died in a car accident when he was a teenager, leaving him in the care of an uncle who valued profit above love. Alexander had been forced into the world of business before he was ready, trading late nights of music practice for endless meetings and negotiations. He had once loved the piano. He had once dreamed of composing. But those dreams had been buried under contracts and acquisitions, until nothing remained except the mask of power he wore. People admired him, feared him, envied him. No one knew him, not really. The restaurant embodied the world of contrast between them. For the wealthy patrons, it was a playground. For Alexander, it was another investment. For Camilla, it was the thin rope she clung to in order to keep her mother alive. Every night she moved between tables that smelled of perfumes she could never afford, serving dishes she could never taste, listening to laughter that felt like it belonged to another planet. She swallowed her own hunger, her own dreams, and focused on keeping balance, on not letting her hands tremble when the trays grew too heavy. And still, when the music from the Latin band in the corner drifted too close, something inside her stirred. Her feet tapped softly in rhythm under the tablecloth, unseen by the customers. Her body remembered what her life had forced her to forget. When the shift ended, when Vanessa's scolding finally faded, into the night Camilla sometimes lingered. She would clean longer than necessary, humming to herself, and then when she was sure no one was watching, she would dance. A few steps here, a spin there, her soul reminding her she was more than a servant of other people's wealth. That night, when Alexander walked in unannounced, he crossed the invisible boundary that had always separated their worlds. She was not supposed to be seen, he was not supposed to notice. But in that suspended moment under golden lights and samba drums, their stories began to collide. Camilla's life was a series of long shifts that blurred into each other like a film reel, stuck on repeat. She arrived before sunset, when the restaurant was quiet, polished the silverware until her fingers ached, set the tables with precision, so fine that one misplaced fork could earn a sharp rebuke from Vanessa, and then worked through the endless stream of guests who demanded without gratitude. The nights were loud with clinking glasses and laughter, but to her they felt like cages. She was always moving, yet always trapped in the same loop. Customers rarely looked her in the eye. They ordered expensive wines and Wagyu steaks as if she were not there at all. When they did look, it was often with annoyance or condescension. One man once snapped his fingers in her face because his martini had taken 2 minutes longer than expected. A woman scolded her for refilling the water glass too full as if she had committed a crime. Each insult pressed into her chest, reminding her of her place. She swallowed the sting because she had no choice. At home, her mother lay in a small bed, fighting illness that grew worse with each passing week. The medicine was costly, rent was rising. Without this job, there would be nothing. Vanessa, the shift manager, took every opportunity to remind her that she was replaceable. Camilla often wondered if Vanessa singled her out, because she was young, or because she was quiet, or because her beauty still flickered faintly despite exhaustion. Whatever the reason, Vanessa's words cut like glass. "Do you think guests pay to see your sad eyes?" she sneered once when Camilla failed to smile fast enough. "If you cannot perform, you are nothing here." Camilla nodded, lips pressed together, and carried on. She had learned the art of silence, but silence did not mean absence of feeling. Each night when she returned to her tiny room, she collapsed on the thin mattress and stared at the cracked ceiling. The dreams she had as a child drifted back. She remembered carnival streets in Brazil, the rhythm of drums, her mother clapping along, while she spun barefoot in the kitchen. Samba had been joy language life. She had wanted to study dance, maybe even teach one day. But that dream had evaporated when bills piled higher than hope. Now she danced only in her mind, imagining herself on a stage instead of behind a tray. Sometimes in the restaurant itself, When she thought no one was watching, she allowed herself tiny rebellions. She would move her hips just slightly in rhythm to the band that played on weekends. She would tap her shoe in time with the music as she refilled glasses. And when she was left alone after closing when Vanessa had gone home and the last of the staff disappeared into the night, she would turn on the speaker to a Samba track stored on her phone and let herself breathe. In those moments, the stiff uniform became a costume. She could shed the dining hall became a stage, and the shadows became her audience. She twirled, leapt, laughed softly at herself, remembering the girl she used to be. Those moments were rare, but they were survival. Without them, she feared she would dissolve into the role others had written for her invisible servant, nothing more. The struggle was not just at work. Outside the city pressed on her, too. The subway rides were long, and crowded strangers pushed past her without care, and every store window displayed dresses she could never afford. Bills waited like wolves at her door. She kept a photo of her mother, healthy and smiling, tucked inside her apron pocket as a reminder of why she endured. Still, the weight was heavy. She often felt she was living two lives. The one the world saw, the obedient waitress who nodded and smiled, and the one hidden deep inside the dancer who still longed to spin freely, to feel alive. The two lives never touched until that night when Alexander Reed walked in. He was supposed to be unreachable, a name spoken in whispers, a man who could buy and sell futures with a single signature. He was the kind of figure who lived above the clouds while she remained in the dust. Yet he stepped into her secret world and saw what no one else had ever seen. For Camilla, the struggle had always been to keep her spirit alive while reality tried to suffocate it. For the audience, it was impossible not to feel her pain, her quiet endurance, her hidden spark. She was not only carrying trays, she was carrying the weight of dreams unfulfilled, the burden of poverty, the longing for freedom. Every small humiliation built tension. Every small act of resilience built sympathy. By the time Alexander's eyes fell on her dancing, the contrast between what she endured and what she secretly was burned brighter than any chandelier in that restaurant. Alexander Reed was known in every financial magazine as the young titan of hospitality, the man who expanded a modest family inheritance into an empire of luxury hotels and high-end restaurants across the country. He was the face of ambition, the embodiment of success, the name that investors trusted and competitors feared. Yet behind the tailored suits and perfectly timed speeches, there was a man who felt more like a machine than a human being. To his employees, he was a distant figure, a shadow who appeared for inspections or board meetings and left without a trace of warmth. To the media, he was a prodigy, coldly efficient and immune to failure. No one asked if he was happy, because happiness was not a language spoken in his world. Alexander's childhood had ended at 16 when his parents died in a violent car crash that left him standing at a graveside while relatives whispered about inheritances. His uncle, a stern businessman with no patience for grief, took him in and taught him that emotion was weakness, that money was the only shield against the cruelty of the world. Alexander learned to bury his tears, to close the piano he had once loved playing, to put away notebooks filled with half-written songs. Instead, he studied balance sheets, memorized stock reports, and learned to negotiate until his voice could slice through any boardroom. The boy who had once dreamed of music was gone. The young man who replaced him became stone outside and hollow inside. This reputation suited him in business. Investors admired his composure. Journalists described his gaze as ice. Women in his circle gossiped that he was handsome but untouchable, a man who would never bend for anyone. Alexander accepted the role because it protected him. If he let no one in, no one could hurt him. The restaurants he owned were symbols of power, not places of joy. He never sat to savor a meal, never lingered to listen to the bands that played. He walked through each dining room as if inspecting a fortress, noting flaws, calculating profits, moving on. Staff learned not to expect small talk. When he passed, they lowered their heads. He had convinced himself he preferred it this way. What good was connection if it only led to loss? What good was love if it could be ripped away as suddenly as a car accident on a rainy road? Better to stay untouchable. Better to be the man everyone respected, but no one truly knew. Yet cracks existed, faint but undeniable. Sometimes when he heard a street musician playing samba or piano on the corner, his steps slowed before he forced himself onward. Sometimes he caught his own reflection and barely recognized the eyes staring back, eyes that used to shine with hunger for art and now looked like mirrors without light. He drank expensive wine but tasted nothing. He lived in penthouses but felt no home. The empire thrived while the man at its center drifted colder each year. People whispered that Alexander Reed was too perfect, too disciplined, too composed. But in truth, he was exhausted. Holding stone in place required endless effort. He wondered occasionally what would happen if anyone ever looked past the marble exterior and saw the emptiness beneath. He told himself no one would. That was safer. Then he saw Camilla dancing samba alone in his restaurant, and for the first time in years he forgot the role he was meant to play. The billionaire who had built walls higher than skyscrapers found himself stopping watching and feeling. It unsettled him. It also pulled him towards something he did not understand yet, but could no longer ignore. The music pulsed through the empty restaurant like a secret heartbeat that belonged only to her. Yet when Alexander stepped inside, he found himself caught in its rhythm too, though he had not heard such a sound in years. Camilla spun across the polished floor, her faded burgundy dress flowing around her legs like liquid fire, her bare feet gliding without hesitation. She laughed quietly to herself and lifted her arms high, as if claiming a freedom no one could take. She did not know anyone was watching. Alexander froze at the threshold, his hand still resting on the door handle, his chest tight with something he could not name. He had watched dancers before at galas and events where performances were staged for applause, but this was different. This was raw and unguarded. This was life breaking through silence. For the first time in years, his eyes softened. He saw not the uniformed waitress who carried trays with lowered gaze, but a woman blazing with forgotten dreams. The way she moved reminded him of the nights he had played piano as a boy, pouring his heart into notes until they soared. It was the same language of soul, the same refusal to be silenced. For a moment he felt as if he were witnessing something sacred. Then his shoes scraped against the floor. Camilla's eyes flew open. She gasped and stumbled back, her breath catching when she saw him standing there in his immaculate suit. Panic flushed across her face. She clutched at the hem of her dress as if to hide it. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally she stammered, "Mr. Reed, I did not know anyone was here. I am so sorry. I will stop right now. Her hands trembled. She looked like a child caught doing something forbidden. The music still played in the background, mocking the silence stretching between them. Alexander studied her carefully. He could have told her to leave, could have reminded her that she was staff, and this was not her stage. That was what everyone expected of him. That was the role he had perfected. But something in her fear struck deeper than anger. He remembered how it felt to hide passion as if it were shame. He remembered the weight of burying music in silence. He took a slow step closer. His voice, when it came, was lower than she had ever heard it, gentle, almost human. "Do not stop." Camilla blinked in shock, her mouth falling open. "Sir, I should not." He shook his head once. "You should." She stared at him, unsure whether it was a trap. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought he must hear it. She had been invisible to him for so long, and now he was looking at her as if she existed, as if she were not just a shadow in black uniform, but someone real. "I did not mean disrespect," she whispered. "This place is not mine." "Tonight it is," he said. Something in his tone held no judgment, only invitation. The words rattled her. No one had ever given her such permission. Slowly she raised her arms again, uncertain but unwilling to waste the moment. She let her body sway back into the rhythm, the samba beat, guiding her steps. At first she was stiff, conscious of his eyes on her, but then the music pulled her deeper, and the fear melted. She spun once, twice, the dress flaring, her laughter breaking free again. Alexander's lips curved faintly, not a full smile, but the ghost of one. He watched her not as a boss observing an employee, but as a man witnessing something he thought he had lost forever. Her movements carved cracks in his stone facade. When she twirled, he felt warmth stir in his chest. When she laughed, he felt the echo of a sound he had not allowed himself in years. "Camilla," he said quietly, testing her name on his tongue. She stopped mid-turn, eyes wide. No one at the restaurant ever used her name, least of all him. The sound of it from his lips was startling, tender, almost reverent. "Yes, sir," she breathed. "Camilla," he repeated more firmly this time. "I have never seen you like this." She swallowed hard, unsure what to say. She had been seen at last, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. The music slowed to its end, and silence rushed back into the vast hall, but neither of them moved. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, caught in the strange, fragile thread binding them. Alexander finally broke the stillness, his voice softer than any investor had ever heard. "Thank you for showing me," he murmured. Her brows knitted in confusion. "Showing you what?" He hesitated, then said, "What freedom looks like." Her breath hitched. She felt tears threaten, but blinked them away. She did not understand what had just happened, only that something had shifted forever. He turned, then walking toward the exit, his figure tall and composed, yet changed somehow. Before leaving, he glanced back one last time, his eyes lingering on her, as if memorizing the image. Then he was gone. Camilla stood alone, her heart racing, her body trembling. She touched her chest and whispered to herself, "What just happened?" She did not know, but she knew her life would never be the same. The next morning the restaurant buzzed as usual, with the clatter of dishes and the chatter of staff. But Camilla moved as if walking on glass every step, haunted by the memory of the night before. She kept her head down, tying her apron tightly, her mind racing with questions. Had she imagined it? Had he truly told her not to stop? Had the cold billionaire actually spoken her name? Her pulse still quickened at the memory of his voice, softer than she ever thought possible. She wanted to forget, but she could not. When Alexander entered that day, the atmosphere shifted as it always did. Conversations hushed trays, steadied everyone alert to his presence. Yet instead of walking past her without a glance, his eyes lingered. He paused near the service station where she arranged glasses, his voice low but clear. "Good morning, Camilla." Her hands nearly dropped the glass. She froze, then forced herself to answer, "Good morning, sir." Vanessa, who was nearby, raised her brows, suspicion gleaming in her eyes. Alexander gave a curt nod and walked away, but the damage was done. For the first time in her life at the restaurant, Camilla felt seen. It should have warmed her, but it also filled her with fear. Attention from men like him was dangerous. She reminded herself to keep distance, to protect the fragile walls she had built, but the memory of her name in his mouth lingered. Over the following days, subtle changes unfolded. Alexander asked small questions as he passed by. "How long have you worked here? Are you managing the late shift again?" They were simple words, but for Camilla, they carried weight. No one of his stature had ever cared about her schedule or her life. Each time she answered carefully respectful, yet her heart betrayed her beating faster. Vanessa noticed everything. Her sharp eyes caught the way Alexander looked at Camilla with curiosity, not ownership, but genuine attention. It made her seethe. She began snapping harsher than usual, finding fault in every movement Camilla made. "You are too slow. The napkins are crooked. Stand straight, do not slouch like a peasant." Camilla endured, biting her tongue, though the insults cut deeper now because they followed moments that had almost felt like kindness. The staff whispered too. They noticed the way the billionaire paused near her station, the way he spoke her name. Rumors began to coil through the kitchen. Camilla felt the weight of eyes on her heavier than any tray. One evening after closing, as she scrubbed the last wine glasses, Alexander appeared again at the doorway. She stiffened, ready to be scolded, but he only said, "You work too late." She blinked. "It is my shift, sir. You should rest," he replied. She did not know how to answer. No one had ever cared if she rested. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze soft. Then he left, leaving her trembling. That night, she lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering why he was looking at her differently, why she could not stop thinking about him. Fear mingled with a fragile spark of something she dared not name. The billionaire was beginning to thaw, and she was caught in the warmth and the danger of it. Vanessa sharpened her claws, sensing change. She whispered to another waiter, loud enough for Camilla to hear, "Why is the boss interested in her of all people? She is just a waitress." The words stung, but Camilla kept her eyes down. She had survived worse, but deep inside, she feared the storm that might come if Alexander continued to notice her. Yet the small moments of gentleness kept returning. A coffee placed at her station without explanation. A glance held a second too long. A silence between them that felt louder than words. Something had begun, and neither of them could undo it. It began with a simple accident, but in a world where everything could be recorded, nothing stayed private for long. One Friday night, the restaurant was packed with wealthy guests, and among them was a group of young influencers live streaming their evening. They drank expensive cocktails, laughed too loudly, and aimed their phones at everything, including the staff. Camilla served them with polite efficiency, though their careless remarks about her accent burned. Later, when her shift ended and the guests lingered, she stayed behind to clean. The band had finished packing up, and the lights were dim. For a moment, she allowed herself one of her secret rebellions. She put her phone on the speaker, pressed play on an old Samba track, and stepped into the empty corner of the hall. Her body swayed, her feet moved with memory, and she spun across the polished floor. She did not know one of the influencers had returned to retrieve a forgotten jacket. He saw her, laughed quietly, and instead of announcing his presence, he pulled out his phone. The video he captured showed Camilla barefoot in her faded dress, twirling as if the hall were a stage. He uploaded it with a mocking caption, "Waitress," pretending to be a star. By morning, the clip had spread across social media. It was not because of cruelty alone. People shared it because some mocked her, but others saw the beauty in her freedom. Still within the walls of the restaurant, it was scandal. Vanessa discovered it first, her lips curling in satisfaction. She printed screenshots and showed them to other staff. By noon, the whispers spread like wildfire. Customers recognized Camilla, and some laughed openly. "Is that not the girl from the video? She thinks she is a dancer." Each word landed like a stone in her chest. When she arrived for her shift, the atmosphere was heavy. Vanessa cornered her in the storage room, her eyes gleaming. "Do you realize what you have done? You embarrassed this restaurant. You embarrassed Mr. Reed. You are nothing but a waitress, and yet you dance here like you own the floor." Camilla stammered that she had not known anyone was recording, that it had been after hours, but Vanessa cut her off. "Excuses will not save you. If I were him, I would fire you this instant." The words rang in her head as she stepped onto the floor, her colleagues avoiding her eyes. When Alexander entered later that day, the staff waited for his reaction. He carried himself as always, tall, composed, unreadable. He gave instructions to the maître d' and moved through the room as if nothing was amiss. He did not look at Camilla. Her chest tightened. She had hoped foolishly that he might say something, might offer the same gentleness he had before. But his silence was louder than Vanessa's cruelty. Guests continued to whisper behind menus. Someone even hummed Samba mockingly as she passed. Camilla endured, but each step grew heavier. When her shift ended, she ran outside into the cool night air, leaning against the alley wall, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to quit. She wanted to run far from the shame. All she had ever tried to do was survive. And in a single moment, her secret sanctuary had been turned into ridicule. At home, her mother asked why her eyes were red. Camilla forced a smile, said she was tired. She could not bear to tell her the truth. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his office, watching the storm unfold. Reports reached him quickly. The viral clip was being discussed in news blogs. Investors had emailed asking if the scandal would affect the brand. His advisors suggested immediate dismissal. "She is only a waitress, Mr. Reed. Cut ties and it ends." He listened silently, fingers steepled before him. Inside, conflict raged. The old Alexander, the one carved from ice, would have acted without hesitation, severing the thread before it tangled further. But something about the video unsettled him. He watched it alone on his screen. Camilla spinning barefoot, her laughter ringing clear. To the world it was a joke. To him it was a mirror. He saw in her movements what he had buried in himself. The longing to be free. The courage to be alive even in shadows. and he said nothing. That silence became his choice. The next evening, when Camilla returned, Vanessa smirked, waiting to see her destroyed. But Alexander gave no sign of defense, no words of comfort. Camilla carried trays, her hands shaking. When their eyes finally met across the room, he looked away. The betrayal pierced deeper than Vanessa's cruelty. She realized she had expected him to protect her, and his refusal cut the last thread of hope. After her shift, she gathered her belongings quietly and told a colleague she might not return. "It is too much," she whispered. "I cannot keep being laughed at. I cannot keep being invisible until it suits someone to notice." She walked out into the night, determined never to step back into that gilded cage. For her, it was the lowest point. For the audience, it was heartbreak. The girl who had dared to dance was crushed by humiliation, and the man who could have lifted her chose silence. The midpoint crisis tore them apart, leaving only questions. Would Alexander continue to hide behind his walls? Or would he risk everything to acknowledge the woman who had reminded him what it meant to feel? The scandal refused to fade. By the end of the week, the video had been replayed hundreds of thousands of times across different platforms, some mocking, some praising, some twisting it into memes. Headlines read, "Waitress Samba goes viral in Billionaire's restaurant," and others speculated about what it revealed about Reed hospitality. Investors demanded explanations, and the board grew restless. Alexander faced them in the glass conference room, high above the city, their voices sharp. One shareholder slammed a fist on the table. "This nonsense makes us look unprofessional. Fire her immediately." Another chimed in. "She is a distraction, a liability. She is replaceable." Alexander listened expressionless. He gave no promises, no defense, only silence that left everyone unsettled. But silence was not enough outside the boardroom. At the restaurant, guests whispered louder. Some arrived just to see the waitress from the video. Phones lifted when Camilla passed, recording her without permission. Every tray she carried felt heavier under the scrutiny. Vanessa seized the moment, her voice dripping with authority. "You see what you have caused," she hissed one afternoon as Camilla arranged cutlery. "If Mr. Reed had any sense, you would already be gone." Camilla clenched her jaw, saying nothing, but the shame pressed hard. She had thought of quitting, but her mother's medicine cost too much. She had no choice but to endure. The breaking point came during a gala event. The restaurant had been transformed for the evening, filled with glittering chandeliers and gowns sparkling under soft lights. The city's elite mingled, sipping champagne, discussing deals. Camilla and the other staff moved quickly to keep everything perfect. She wore her uniform crisp, her hair tied tight, her face calm, though inside she trembled. She hoped to remain invisible. Vanessa had other plans. As Camilla carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres, Vanessa stepped into her path and, in a voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear, said, "Is this the stage you prefer, Camilla, or do you want to dance for them too?" Laughter rippled from a few corners as guests recognized the reference. Camilla froze, humiliation flooding her cheeks. She lowered her gaze, gripping the tray tighter. Vanessa smirked, pressing on. "Maybe you think you are special because people online find you amusing. Let me remind you, you are nothing but a servant." Each word cracked like a whip in the grand hall. For a moment, silence followed, heavy and cruel. Then a new voice cut through, steady and commanding. "Enough." All heads turned. Alexander had risen from his seat at the center table, his figure imposing, his eyes locked on Vanessa. The crowd hushed, waiting. His reputation for coldness made his intervention shocking. Vanessa stammered, "Mr. Reed, I was only correcting." He lifted a hand, silencing her. His gaze shifted to Camilla, still standing stiff, her knuckles white around the tray. Then he looked back at the guests, his voice carrying clear across the hall. "She is not invisible. She is not a joke. She is the bravest woman I know." A gasp spread through the room. Cameras lifted instinctively, capturing the moment. Vanessa's face blanched, her smirk collapsing. Alexander's words hung heavy, undeniable. For the first time he had broken character, the stone facade cracked wide open in public. Camilla's eyes widened, her breath caught. She could hardly believe he had said it. The hall buzzed with murmurs, some shocked, some moved. Alexander's stare never wavered. "Respect is not measured by money or title," he continued. "If anyone here thinks otherwise, then perhaps you do not deserve the service she gives you." The declaration silenced even the boldest voices. Vanessa bowed her head, retreating humiliated. Camilla stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden turn. For her, it was as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had been humiliated seconds before, now defended by the man who had once never looked at her. The guests whispered furiously. Phones captured every second. By midnight, clips of Alexander's words spread online, just as fast as the Samba video had. "Billionaire defends Waitress" trended across feeds. Some called it scandalous, others romantic. But one thing was certain. Nothing between Alexander and Camilla could return to what it had been before. Camilla did not return home that night with her usual heaviness. Instead, she carried confusion, swirling with fragile hope, her heart pounding with questions she dared not voice. She had expected Alexander to remain silent forever, yet in front of everyone he had spoken words that burned into her chest, words that shattered the wall between them. Still fear lingered, because she could not trust miracles, not when life had taught her that kindness was fleeting. The next day she stayed later than her shift, sitting alone in the quiet corner of the staff lounge, turning her mother's old bracelet over and over in her hand. She whispered to herself that she should not believe in impossible things. Yet when the door opened and Alexander himself stepped inside, she felt the air change. He dismissed the few staff who lingered with a nod, and then stood before her, not as the distant CEO, but as a man stripped of his armor. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said softly, "You should not have been treated that way. I should have stopped it sooner." Camilla lowered her gaze. "It does not matter. People like me get used to humiliation." His jaw tightened. "It matters to me." The words startled her. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and saw something she had never seen there before. Not ice, not distance, but vulnerability. He sat down across from her, his hands clasped, as though steadying himself. "I know what it feels like to lose yourself," he admitted. "I once loved music, piano. I wanted to compose. After my parents died, it was taken from me. My uncle told me there was no profit in art, only in power. I buried it. I became stone because it was the only way to survive. But when I saw you dance, I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to be alive." Camilla's throat tightened. She whispered, "My mother taught me samba. She said it was joy in movement. When she became sick, I stopped dancing. I told myself it was childish, but it was the only place I still felt her near. That night I was not trying to be seen. I was just trying to breathe again. His eyes softened. And yet you were seen. By me. She blinked, fighting tears. I do not understand why you care. I am just a waitress. He shook his head firmly. No, you are you, and that is enough. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of unspoken truths. For the first time, she felt the weight she carried lift slightly, as if someone else had finally reached to share it. She allowed herself a small smile, fragile but real. He watched it as if it were the rarest treasure. Do not let them take your joy, he said. The world will try. It almost took mine forever. Do not let it take yours. She nodded slowly, feeling warmth spread in her chest. In that quiet corner away from cameras and gossip, two broken pasts touched and began to heal. It was not yet love, not yet a promise, but it was the seed of both. Days after the confrontation, the restaurant felt different, though nothing outward had changed. Guests still filled the tables, Vanessa still barked orders, the staff still hurried through their routines. Yet Camilla carried herself with a new steadiness. The echo of Alexander's words remained like a shield in her chest. Still doubt gnawed at her. She told herself not to read meaning into kindness, not to believe in fantasies. But then one evening, when the restaurant finally emptied, Alexander appeared again. The lights were dim, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and fading perfume. He stood near the corner of the hall, his voice low but firm. "Play the music again." She blinked, confused. "Sir." His expression softened slightly. "The Samba, play it." Her heart raced. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone, scrolled to the track, and pressed play. The drums filled the silence. She hesitated, but before she could speak, he stepped closer and extended a hand. "Dance with me." She stared at him, stunned. "You cannot be serious?" His mouth curved faintly. "I am many things, but not a liar. Dance with me, Camilla." Her chest tightened. She had danced alone countless times, never with anyone, least of all him. "I do not know if I can," she whispered. "Then let me be the fool," he said softly. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady. They began awkwardly, his steps stiff, his body too accustomed to control. She laughed despite herself, the sound bright and unrestrained. "You are terrible," she teased. He chuckled low, a sound that startled even him. "Then teach me." Slowly she guided him, hips swaying gently, steps finding rhythm. He followed clumsily at first, then with growing ease. The tension broke, replaced by something lighter. They laughed together as they spun across the empty floor, the music carrying them. For the first time, Alexander allowed himself to stumble without shame, to exist without perfection. For the first time, Camilla allowed herself to be touched without fear. The distance between Billionaire and Waitress dissolved, leaving only a man and a woman moving in rhythm. The song ended, but they did not step apart. They stood close, breathing the same air, his hand lingering at her waist, her gaze locked on his. Silence stretched heavy with unspoken words. He whispered, "When you laugh, this place feels alive." Her cheeks warmed. "I should not be laughing with you." His eyes darkened, not cold, but intense. "And yet you are." The spell might have broken, but he did not let it. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, a gesture tender enough to undo her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the impossible. When she opened them, he was still watching her, not as an employer, not as a stranger, but as someone who saw her, truly saw her. The world outside still loomed with its judgments and dangers, but here in this fragile moment, a romance had begun to bloom. She stepped back, finally, her breath shaky. "I should go," she whispered. He nodded, though his eyes lingered. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reminding me how to live." She left the hall, her heart racing, unable to deny what had taken root. That night, in her small room, she lay awake, replaying every second, every laugh, every glance. She pressed her hands to her chest and whispered to herself that she was falling even if she should not. And in his penthouse high above the city, Alexander stared at the skyline with a glass of untouched wine, thinking not of contracts or profits, but of a girl who had taught him to dance again. Rumors spread quickly after the gala, and the whispers only grew louder. Following the night, Alexander defended her, but this time they carried a different tone. Some mocked, some speculated, but others admired. "Billionaire protects Waitress" was the headline plastered across gossip columns. Paparazzi lingered near the restaurant, hoping for a glimpse. Camilla tried to shrink further into invisibility, but invisibility was no longer possible. Vanessa's hostility sharpened. One evening she cornered Camilla in the kitchen, her voice cold. "Do not think his attention will last. Men like him get bored. You will be discarded and forgotten." Camilla's chest tightened, but before she could respond, Alexander walked in. His presence silenced the room. His eyes swept over Vanessa, then landed on Camilla. He did not waver. "You are wrong," he said calmly. "I do not discard what I value." Vanessa flushed and backed away, humiliated. The staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. Camilla felt her knees weaken, but Alexander extended a hand, steadying her with a glance that said more than words. A week later, a charity event hosted by Reed Hospitality became the stage for his boldest choice yet. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, journalists lined the edges, cameras flashing as dignitaries and celebrities mingled. Camilla was not supposed to attend, but Alexander had sent a car for her. She arrived in a simple cream dress, borrowed from a friend, nothing compared to the glittering gowns around her. Yet when she entered the room, all eyes turned. She walked nervously, scanning for a place to disappear, but Alexander crossed the hall, meeting her halfway. He offered his hand openly for the entire crowd to see. Gasps rippled through the guests. Cameras flashed. He guided her to the center table where board members sat, their disapproval evident. Ignoring them, he raised his glass. "Tonight we celebrate not only our success, but courage. The courage to remain true to who you are, no matter how the world mocks you." He glanced at Camilla, and in that moment his meaning was undeniable. Murmurs filled the hall, but Alexander continued unfazed. After the speeches, he pulled her aside into a quieter corner. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box. Her heart raced, fearing a ring. Yet when he opened it, a silver bracelet gleamed delicate with a charm shaped like a dancer mid-step. His eyes held hers as he spoke. "Not a ring, not yet, but a promise that I choose you not because the world demands it, but because I want to. A promise that you are not invisible to me and never will be again." Tears blurred her vision. She whispered, "I never thought someone like you could see someone like me." He shook his head gently. "You are not someone like anything, Camilla. You are yourself. And that is exactly who I want." Her hands trembled as she held out her wrist. He clasped the bracelet carefully, his fingers brushing her skin, lingering with quiet reverence. Cameras caught the moment, though he seemed not to care. For Camilla, it was as if the noise of the world faded, leaving only his steady gaze, his quiet vow. The fear of humiliation, the weight of invisibility, melted, replaced by a fragile but certain truth. She was chosen not as a spectacle, not as charity, but as love. Around them the gala continued, but in that small circle of light, two lives rewritten by pain found a new beginning. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new world for Camilla. When she returned to the restaurant, the same marble floors stretched beneath her feet, and the same chandeliers glowed above her, but everything had changed. She no longer walked with her head down or hid her voice in silence. She walked with steadiness, her shoulders back, her gaze lifted. Whispers followed her, but they no longer pierced. The bracelet on her wrist shimmered with each step, a reminder that she was no longer invisible. Vanessa tried once more to assert control, snapping orders with her usual venom, but Alexander arrived unannounced one afternoon, striding through the hall. He paused at Camilla's side and without hesitation took her hand in front of every staff member, every diner, every pair of watching eyes. "She is with me," he said calmly. Vanessa's face drained of color, her authority dissolving. She muttered an excuse and retreated, leaving the others stunned. From that moment, no one dared question Camilla's place again. For Alexander, the change was just as profound. The man who had once been stone now laughed more often than his board could believe. He spent less time in sterile meetings and more in the restaurant, listening to the music, watching the life he had nearly forgotten. He learned to smile genuinely, not for cameras but for himself and for her. One evening, long after closing time, when the hall was quiet again, he turned on the Samba track she loved most. The golden lights bathed the room, and he extended his hand. She took it with a soft laugh, and together they danced. Not as billionaire and waitress, not as master and servant, but as two souls who had finally found each other. Their movements were imperfect, but their rhythm was true. He whispered against her ear, "You turned my silence into music again." She leaned closer, her voice trembling with emotion, "And you made me believe I was worth being seen." The music swelled around them, their laughter mingling with the beat. Outside the city pulsed with noise and expectation, but inside the empty restaurant, they created a world of their own. In that moment, it was clear to anyone watching that this was not a passing scandal, not a fleeting story for gossip. It was the beginning of something real. And as they moved together, hand in hand, the cold walls of his life melted into warmth. For Camilla, the girl who once scrubbed glasses and swallowed humiliation, the journey had turned toward home. For Alexander, the man who had buried his heart beneath contracts, the journey had turned toward love. Sometimes all it takes is one dance to thaw even the coldest heart.